Hey everyone, so I just saw The Wailing, which is a new film from the acclaimed director Hong Jin-na. And I actually loved it. I thought it was fantastic. Now, when I say that, I say it as my own opinion about the film. I loved this film. That being said, it's not a particularly great film, and we can get more into that in a little bit, but mainly, to get started, the film is about 4 or so main characters. One is this girl who is called the Woman with No Name, and who is played by Hu Hee-chun. And then we have a police officer who is technically our main character, and he's played by Do-won Kwak. And then we have our Japanese man, who's I think known in the film as the Stranger, and he's played by none other than Jun Kunimura. And so that makes up our main real trio, the 3 that are the most important in the film. And then there is another person in the film, and he's the shaman for the police officer, and he's played by Jun Min Wang. And they all did a great job, actually. This film is propped up on excellent performances from everyone, even a young girl who is in a supporting lead role, I would say, and she is actually really great. A lot of times you see kid actors who are just pathetically bad, and nobody really cares about it because they say, hey, they're kids, give them some slack. But to me, a kid actor is still an actor, still hired to play a role, still given money to play a role, and that doesn't the fact that they're a kid doesn't excuse if they're a bad actor in a film. But I'm proud, or not proud, so weird. I'm happy to say that the child performer in this film is really great. Aside from the performances, the film does a lot right. It's very reminiscent of Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell, actually, because The Wailing is also written in a Shakespearean 5-act structure, which, if you don't know what that is, it's basically exactly how it sounds. 5 acts instead of 3 for a film. This film is written in a 5-act structure, and when you do that, it keeps things constantly evolving. Usually in 5-act structure, which is the case with this film and Drag Me to Hell, there's a series of false climaxes where the action all builds up to one peak, and then it seems like it climaxes and then heads back down and might be ending, and then it'll do it again and again, and however many times the film needs to do it, it will hit these false climaxes and make you say, oh, okay, we're getting close to the end, and then something will happen. Oh, crap, no, we're not even close. There's one point in this film, The Wailing, when I was watching it, because it's on VOD now, so I'd recommend watching it. But I was watching it, and there's a false climax that happened, and I was like, there's no way it's almost over again, because I knew it was 2.5 hours long, and I checked the runtime, and there's still over an hour left. So I knew at that point that this was one of those films that was going to do a lot of false climaxes, and even though I knew that that was going to happen, this was the most unpredictable film that I have seen in 2016. I had no idea where it was going. None whatsoever. Even when I was constantly trying to pick it apart and evaluate it and figure it out, I could not get a read on this movie. And that is why I love it so much, because it did something that horror movies so rarely do, and that is be unpredictable. And that's mainly because it plays off a very standard horror formula. The horror formula that I'm talking about is in almost every horror movie, if you look. A character is a nice guy, he's not involved in much stuff, and then suddenly things start to happen to him or around him, and then, or her, I guess. And then they get involved, bad things start happening, they get desperate, they go to a shaman in this case, or a medium in the case of Insidious or The Conjuring or movies like that, and then things really start happening, and then the medium usually helps them resolve it, and then the movie ends. But this is that exact thing, but it knows that it is, and it plays off of that. He does all of that, all the way leading up to that shaman bit that I was talking about, where most horror movies will end right at that hour and a half, 2 hour mark. They get the medium helps them, crazy stuff happens, and they resolve. This movie has another hour after where most horror movies get resolved. And that particularly is why it is so effective. It takes this formula and spins it and puts it on its head, and it makes you think a certain way. You're trained to think a certain way with movies like this. You're trained to know the formula without really knowing the formula, if that makes any sense. It wants you to think about it as if you would think about every other horror movie, and when you do, it pulls the rug out from you so hard that it hurts. It hurts that you wouldn't see these things coming. And that is why it's so good. That is why I love this film so much, is that it's so unpredictable. But, of course, a film is made by more than just being unpredictable or having an interesting, unique, original story, as this one does. And mainly, the other things that I loved about this film is that it's shot as if it were a real event. It's not shot like a documentary per se, but the shooting style is so natural and realistic that it's kind of disturbing. This movie gets incredibly disturbing because of how real it feels. Put any more lighting in a scene than would be in a scene in real life. Like there's a scene when a house is burning down, and the only lights in the scene are the policeman's car lights and I believe like some work lights, if I remember correctly. And it makes it feel much more real. As I said earlier, it isn't perfect. And while I was watching it, I was almost willing to give it a near perfect grade, and I wanted to desperately, but the fifth act, or the final act of the film, is kind of a mess. The film all builds up to this event, as I said, with this structure. It all builds up to this real climax. And things happen, things are introduced, characters have new identities that are revealed, and when it does that, the rest of the film starts to fall apart because there's certain things that are revealed, certain identities that are shown to you, and it starts to not make any sense. As the credits rolled, I was still in my little fever state of loving and being unsettled to the 10th degree of this movie. But when I got over that initial reaction to the film and I started thinking about the ending and thinking about the rest of the film, it does not hold up as well. What happens in the end is more or less unpredictable. Like I was saying, it's something that kind of turns you on your head and you're like, whoa, what? And that's exactly what I wanted out of it. But there's a couple things that really I was scared would happen. And when they did happen, it kind of made the movie fall on its face. And I mean that in the most loving way to this film, because again, it's one of my favorites of the year. It's actually in my top 10 for the year so far. But the ending really, really makes this movie suffer. And it's in this ending, again, when you start to realize some of the negative things through the movie, like characters irrationally reacting to certain situations that wouldn't make any sense for somebody to actually do, or characters not having very much depth to them. So when the ending hits and the crap hits the fan, you don't really care as much. And you don't care as much, A, because the characters aren't as rounded as they should be, and B, because, again, it's a lot of things happen that are really dumb in the ending that don't make a lot of sense. So, in the end, I would give this a solid 7 out of 10, and definitely recommend seeing. I would recommend everyone seeing it because it's great. Like it's a lot of fun to watch, and it is very effective in what it wants to do. Again, it doesn't hit everything as well as it should or wants to, but for the 2 hours prior to the ending, it is well worth watching. It's well worth spending 2 hours with. And I would definitely recommend it, highly recommend it. It's one of the best films that's come out this year so far. And I know there hasn't been a whole lot that's been even good, but it's definitely one of the best so far this year. And if you haven't seen it, you can rent it for like $3 or less. So do that because it's worth it. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. I don't know what this is. It's